I want to take a moment to address this comment because it highlights something very important for the church. And I thank this person for bringing this question up because it really matters. What initially comes to mind is that we, as followers of Christ, must properly interpret Scripture. Context is so important. I made a statement last night that there is no such thing as a female pastor. And this is a truth that I firmly stand on. To this statement, the person said, I was with you until I heard you say that there can never be a female pastor. What happened to the scripture that says there is neither Jew nor Greek, male or female? And so we ask, where did this passage of text come from? Well, it comes from Galatians 3. And when you read this verse in light of the chapter and in light of the whole book of Galatians, you will see that this verse addresses salvation and standing before God rather than a description of roles of men and women in the church. And so we ask, what is women's involvement in the universal church? Should women lead? Should women teach? Should women preach? As I always say, what does God say about this? And the only place in Scripture outside of 1 Corinthians 14 where an answer to this question is given is 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14. Paul writes, "Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor." We have to take this passage into consideration as we unpack what Paul is saying here. Notice that Paul specifies the subjects of teaching and assuming authority in the passage from 1 Timothy. This is significant. What is Paul saying here? Simply, a woman is to be quiet in that she does not teach men in the church, and she shows her submission to authority by learning. In other words, that is not an absolute command for women to remain silent at all times in services, because earlier in 1 Corinthians 11:5, Paul mentions a situation where women are praying and prophesying in public. He wrote, "But every woman who prays or prophesies." When we look at the context of 1 Corinthians 14, we see the overall concern is orderly worship. We have to understand that the church of Corinth was known for the disorder that was rampant in that assembly. Everyone in the Corinthian church services were participating whenever and however they desired. Those with the gift of tongues were speaking simultaneously, and no one was concerned with interpreting what was being said. Those with a supposed revelation from God were shouting out randomly, and apparently no one was evaluating what was being offered as prophecy. The meetings in Corinth were characterized by chaos, and no one was being edified or instructed. So to remedy this, Paul instructed a number of groups to be quiet at certain times and under certain conditions. And women were one of these groups. Interpreted in its context, 1 Corinthians 14:33 through 35 is not a command for women to be silent at all times in the church. Rather, it's a command in agreement with 1 Timothy 2:11 through 12 that women are not to exercise authority over men in the church. In other words, the only roles women cannot fill in the church are ones that involve teaching or exercising authority over men. Simply, Paul is only forbidding women from filling the office and role of the pastor. He is not prohibiting them from teaching in other appropriate conditions and circumstances. It is very clear that women are not to lead in the services of the church, but they may pray and proclaim the truth to unbelievers as well as teach children and other women as long as there is a proper distinction from men. On top of that, when we look at the scripture as a whole, in its context, where do you see a female teacher, leader, or shepherd mentioned who is leading, teaching, and pastoring men? I could not find one example. Therefore, because of the teaching of Paul and zero examples of female shepherds ever mentioned in the entire Bible, it's safe to say that a female pastor is not biblical. Now, can women lead and teach other women and children? Absolutely, as long as they are leading and teaching with sound doctrine, sound theology. So we see clearly that Scripture has laid out the roles of men and women, and we all must stay in our lanes. This is my interpretation, and I stand firm on that.